He stared into the mirror and saw a man repeating the same thoughts every day. I can't. It's too late. I'll fail again. He didn't know those words weren't harmless. They were commands, programming his destiny. This channel tells real and fictional stories inspired by Napoleon Hill's timeless wisdom about the mind, faith, and transformation. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe and tell us in the comments what belief you're ready to erase tonight. He looked around the room, half expecting to see someone there, but he was alone. Still, the voice continued. He always thought fear was natural, a part of who he was. It was the silent companion that walked beside him since childhood, whispering warnings, controlling his choices, and shaping the boundaries of his life. He learned early to stay small, stay quiet, and never expect too much. His mother used to tell him, "Be careful, don't get your hopes up. The world doesn't give second chances." His teachers told him, "Some people are born to lead, others to follow. Just find stability and be grateful." And so he did. He built a life of quiet safety, predictable, controlled, and suffocating. But deep inside, he felt it, the echo of something buried. A voice weaker than fear, but still alive. It whispered at night when the world fell silent. You were meant for more. He ignored it. He had bills, responsibilities, expectations. Dreams, he thought, were for others, the lucky ones. He woke each morning with the same rhythm: coffee, work, fatigue, distraction, sleep. But between each day's repetition, something in him began to ache. It wasn't pain, but a kind of soul hunger, a longing for meaning, for fire, for life beyond survival. He didn't know it then, but his thoughts were forming patterns, invisible blueprints shaping every outcome he called bad luck. He didn't realize that every complaint, every doubt, every phrase he spoke was a command to his subconscious mind. And the subconscious, obedient and literal, never argues. It doesn't ask if you meant it. It simply says, "As you believe, so it shall be." The truth is, he wasn't cursed. He was conditioned. Years of fear had written a script in his mind, and he had performed it perfectly. He was both the actor and the author of his own limitations. Every time he wanted to start a business, his mind whispered, "Remember what happened last time?" When he thought of speaking up, it said, "They'll laugh at you." When he dreamed of a better life, it mocked, "People like you don't change." He thought those were his own thoughts. They weren't. They were echoes of other people's fears, voices of parents, teachers, failures, society, stored deep inside him like ghosts wearing his face. One night, unable to sleep, he sat at the edge of his bed, staring into the dark. His chest felt heavy, his mind restless. He whispered to himself, "Why do I keep doing this? Why do I always sabotage myself?" No answer came, but in the silence, he noticed something strange. Whenever he imagined success, his heart raced, not with excitement, but with anxiety. He realized he wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of change. He had lived so long within the walls of limitation that freedom itself felt dangerous. His comfort zone wasn't comfort. It was a cage disguised as safety. Days passed. Weeks blurred. Then one morning, while browsing an old bookstore downtown, he stumbled upon a thin, yellowed book titled Think and Grow Rich. The name meant nothing to him, but the first line he read changed everything. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. He froze. Something inside him shifted, not a flash of inspiration, but recognition. It was as if those words reminded him of something he had always known but had long forgotten. He bought the book, went home, and began to read. Each page felt like a mirror reflecting the hidden architecture of his mind. He learned about belief, faith, repetition, and the power of the subconscious. And for the first time, he saw the truth. He had never failed by chance. He had followed a program. Every belief, every word, every image he repeated had built his world brick by brick. His thoughts were the blueprint. His emotions, the fuel. His habits, the construction crew. He closed the book, his hands trembling. If his thoughts had built this reality, could new thoughts build another? He decided to test it. He tore a sheet of paper from a notebook and wrote a single sentence. "I am the creator of my thoughts. I am capable. I am enough." He taped it to the mirror in his bathroom. Every morning, he looked himself in the eyes and repeated the words, even when his reflection laughed. At first, it felt absurd. The old voice mocked him lies. Empty affirmations. But he remembered what the book said. Faith is a state of mind that may be induced by repeated instruction to the subconscious through the principle of autosuggestion. So he persisted. Every morning, every night, he fed his mind a new truth. At work, when fear crept in, he whispered it under his breath. On the bus, he repeated it silently. Before sleep, he visualized the man he wanted to become, calm, confident, unshaken. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, imperceptibly, something changed. The voice of doubt grew weaker. The heaviness in his chest lifted, and the reflection in the mirror began to look different. He noticed his eyes looked steadier, his posture firmer, the same face, but with light behind it, the kind of light born from belief. He began observing others differently too. At work, he noticed how fear lived in everyone. In the sigh of the coworker who hated Mondays, in the friend who never started his dream project, in the woman who apologized for existing. It wasn't just him. The whole world was hypnotized by its own limiting thoughts. He realized that fear was not a single emotion. It was a culture, taught, inherited, disguised as realism. And the price of belonging to that culture was greatness. From then on, he made a silent vow. He would no longer speak words that worked against him. He would never again say, "I can't," "I'm unlucky," or "it's impossible." He would train his mind like a muscle until faith became instinct. Each morning, he woke with purpose. Before touching his phone or checking the news, he stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and said, "Today, I decide who I am." Some days it felt powerful, others hollow. But he kept going, because he understood something vital. Repetition builds belief, and belief builds reality. He began noticing small miracles. Problems that once terrified him now felt manageable. Tasks he had delayed for months were suddenly done in a single morning. People who used to intimidate him now respected him. He wasn't becoming someone new. He was remembering who he was before the world told him who to be. And that realization filled him with quiet fire. He saw how every limitation he had accepted was just an idea, a lie he had repeated until it became his truth. So he started collecting them, one by one. Every belief that began with "I can't," he wrote down. Every phrase that sounded like fear, he circled. Then, one night, he took the paper outside, lit it with a match, and watched the smoke rise. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching his old limitations turn into ash. It wasn't superstition. It was symbolism. He wasn't burning paper. He was burning the old program. As the smoke disappeared into the night, he whispered, "I choose what stays." And for the first time in his life, he felt something extraordinary: silence. The kind of silence that comes when the noise of doubt finally fades. He realized that the war wasn't out there. It had always been inside. And the battlefield was thought. He remembered another line from Napoleon Hill's book: "Your only limitation is the one you set up in your own mind." He smiled. It no longer felt like philosophy. It felt like truth. He wasn't at the mercy of fate. He was at the mercy of belief. And belief was a choice. He walked back inside, past the mirror that had watched him for years. This time, when he looked into it, he didn't see the man who feared. He saw the one who decided. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The first crack in the illusion that had controlled him all his life. Because once awareness begins, illusion cannot survive. And somewhere deep inside, the man he was destined to become finally opened his eyes. He had been practicing new thoughts for weeks now, yet a quiet resistance still lived beneath the surface. Like a whisper in the dark, it waited for him when the world grew silent. Some mornings, he woke full of strength. Other days, the old voice returned, softer, but still familiar. It spoke in subtle tones: "Don't get too confident. What if you fail again? People like you don't just change overnight." He tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just a habit, just residue from the past. But deep down, he knew belief doesn't vanish easily. It must be faced. And one night, it came for him. The rain was tapping against the window, soft and rhythmic. The room was dim, lit only by the golden hue of a small lamp. He sat at his desk, reading passages from Think and Grow Rich, underlining phrases like, "Faith is the eternal elixir." His eyes drifted away from the page, lost in thought. He had spent his whole life obeying invisible fears, adjusting his dreams to fit within their limits. shrinking himself to match other people's expectations. He suddenly realized that fear had not only shaped his future, it had chosen his entire identity. Who was he without it? The question echoed in the silence. It was the kind of question that opens a door you didn't know existed, and behind it, the mind trembles. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to the storm outside. The wind howled, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled, not loud, but deep, like the world itself was breathing. Then it happened. He felt a strange stillness spread inside him, a pause between thoughts. And in that gap, something appeared, not a sound, but a presence. A shadow standing just behind his mind, ancient and familiar. He could feel it more than see it. It was him, the other him, the one made of doubt, fear, and the echo of every past failure. It whispered in a voice that seemed to come from within his own chest. You're not ready. You never were. You don't have what it takes. He opened his eyes. His pulse quickened. You've tried to change before. Remember how it ended. He closed the book. His hands were trembling slightly. He stood and walked toward the mirror, that same mirror where he had once repeated his affirmations. His reflection stared back, calm but uncertain. Who are you? He whispered. And for the first time, his reflection answered, not in words, but through the feeling that rippled through him. It was as if two versions of himself stood face to face, one believing, one doubting. Faith and fear, locked in eternal argument. He had been trying to silence the old voice. But now, he realized, what if it didn't need to be silenced? What if it needed to be understood? He took a deep breath and spoke softly. I know you. You've been with me for years. You protected me when I didn't believe I could survive. You kept me safe from rejection, from pain, from failure. He paused. But you also kept me small. The air seemed to thicken around him. He continued, his tone calm but resolute. I don't hate you, but I'm done letting you drive. In his mind, he saw the image clearly, a frightened child holding the wheel of his life. The child's hands shook, steering away from every risk, every dream. He knelt beside that image, closed his eyes, and said, You can rest now. I'm taking over. And then, silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the absence of resistance. The storm outside began to fade. The room seemed lighter, larger. He looked back at his reflection. Something had changed. The face staring at him was the same, yet different. The eyes no longer carried that anxious flicker. They were still, grounded, awake. He felt an emotion rising from deep within, grief. He realized he had spent decades believing lies that were never his. He had inherited fear like a family heirloom, passed down through generations of survival. Parents afraid to dream. Teachers afraid to fail. Friends afraid to stand out. He whispered to himself. They gave me their fears, thinking they were giving me wisdom. Tears fell, warm and uncontrollable. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, one by one, cleansing old illusions that had ruled him for too long. Every belief he had once served, I'm not enough, I'm too late, I'll never succeed, began to lose its grip. They weren't truths. They were habits, and habits can be broken. He thought of Napoleon Hill's words. You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul, because you have the power to control your own thoughts. He closed his eyes and repeated it like a mantra. I have the power to control my thoughts. Each repetition felt stronger, truer, more alive. Suddenly, the mirror in front of him seemed to shimmer, as if the glass itself were rippling with energy. He wasn't hallucinating. He was perceiving differently. The reflection began to fracture, splitting into fragments like broken glass suspended in air. Each shard reflected a memory, moments when he had chosen fear over faith. He saw himself declining opportunities, avoiding love, doubting his talents, apologizing for his own existence. And then, something miraculous happened. Each shard began to glow softly, and one by one, they started dissolving into light, not vanishing, but transforming. It felt as though every broken part of him was being reassembled into something stronger, purer. He wasn't breaking down. He was breaking open. He took a slow breath, his chest rising with calm power. The illusion that had once controlled him, the illusion of limitation, shattered completely. He whispered, it was never real. He realized that every thought of fear, every inner voice of failure, had never been an external force. It was imagination, misused creativity. The The same power that could invent fear could also invent faith. He laughed softly through his tears, a mix of disbelief and liberation. The same mind that once enslaved him was now setting him free. He walked toward the window. The rain had stopped. The city outside was quiet, the streets wet with reflection. He saw the lights shimmering on the pavement, like fragments of his old beliefs scattered across the night. He whispered again, "I choose what stays." At that moment, a feeling washed over him. Not excitement, not even joy, but peace. The kind of peace that doesn't shout, but hums. The kind that only comes when illusion dies. He sat back down at his desk. The book lay open where he had left it. He noticed a sentence he hadn't underlined before. Fear is nothing more than a state of mind. He smiled. How simple, and how true. A lifetime of pain, born from a single misunderstanding. He had believed fear was real because he had felt it. But now he knew. Feeling isn't proof. Belief creates feeling. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and imagined his future, this time without the voice of doubt. He saw himself speaking with clarity, creating, leading, inspiring others. He didn't see perfection, he saw movement. Progress. And that was enough. He thought of all the people still trapped in their illusions, just as he had been. People repeating self-defeating mantras without realizing it. I'm not ready. I'm not smart enough. I don't have time. He wanted to reach them, not to preach, but to show what he had discovered. That belief is the soil where destiny grows. He realized he had spent years trying to fix his outer world, his job, his finances, his relationships, but had never changed the soil. He had been planting roses in sand, hoping for a garden. Now, with the illusion gone, he finally understood the principle Napoleon Hill had been teaching all along. Whatever you plant in your mind and nourish with repetition and emotion will grow, whether it is success or failure. He whispered those words softly into the night, like a prayer. The clock ticked quietly on his desk. Midnight passed unnoticed. He was no longer waiting for change. He was the change. He looked once more at the mirror. It was whole again, not shattered, but clear, like newly polished glass. He saw a man standing tall, face calm, eyes awake. No more shadows behind him. No more ghosts of doubt. Just him, and the quiet certainty that he was free. He reached out and touched the mirror with his fingertips. The surface felt cool, smooth, real. For the first time, he smiled not with triumph, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had forced him to wake up. Gratitude for the fear that had taught him faith. Gratitude for the illusion that had revealed truth. He whispered, "Thank you for breaking me open." And as the last echo of that sentence faded into the quiet room, he knew. The old life had ended. A new one had begun. He walked to the window and opened it. The night air met his face, cold, alive, electric. He breathed deeply, feeling every inhale expand his chest with new life. Below, the city pulsed with quiet energy, cars, lights, and distant hums blending into one endless flow. But for him, everything was still. Time seemed to pause, like the universe itself was waiting for him to take the next step. And he did. He whispered, "I'm ready. Not ready to be perfect, not ready to have all the answers, but ready to live as the creator, not the prisoner, of his mind." That night, the illusion broke, not with thunder or spectacle, but with understanding. And from that understanding, faith was born. Because once you realize your fears are self-made, you stop fearing them. And once you stop fearing them, you're free. Morning light poured through the window, soft, golden, quiet. The city outside still yawned awake, but inside that small apartment, something had shifted. It wasn't the world that changed overnight. It was him. The mirror that once reflected doubt now reflected calm. He could feel it, a strange stillness beneath the noise of thought. It was the silence that comes when you've stopped fighting your own mind. He stood before the mirror, the same piece of glass that had once shown a man afraid of his own potential. He touched it gently, as if greeting an old friend. The words he had written weeks ago were still taped to the frame. "I am the creator of my thoughts. I am capable. I am enough." But now, he didn't just repeat them, he believed them. He whispered softly, "Today, I program my mind with truth." Then he smiled, because he understood something profound. The mind is never empty. It's always being programmed, either by you or by the world. And that morning, he chose to take control. He brewed his coffee slowly, intentionally. Each movement was a ritual. He had stopped rushing. Rushing was what he used to do when he was trying to escape himself. Now, he moved with purpose. Every action was a declaration of presence. He sat by the window, opened his notebook, and began to write. Not about his problems, but about possibilities. He wrote, "I am grateful for my mind. I am grateful for the power to direct it." He didn't wait for motivation. He wrote even when he didn't feel inspired, because he knew repetition builds reality. The old him waited for feelings to change before acting. The new him acted to create the feeling. For weeks, he continued this ritual. Morning after morning, he fed his mind faith instead of fear. And slowly, a new rhythm emerged. The same people who used to irritate him now barely affected his mood. He noticed beauty in small things, sunlight on a glass, laughter from a stranger, the quiet hum of a city waking up. His world hadn't become easier. He had simply become clearer. Because when the mind aligns with faith, reality rearranges itself. At work, he began performing differently. He no longer waited to feel ready before sharing ideas. He spoke with confidence, even when his hands trembled slightly. And people noticed, not his words, but his energy. Colleagues began asking for his advice. One of them said, "I don't know what changed in you, but it feels like you know something the rest of us don't." He smiled. What he knew wasn't a secret. It was ancient truth, hidden in plain sight. He said, "The mind obeys what you repeat. So be careful what you say when you're alone." They laughed, but he meant it. Because he had seen it, thoughts were not abstract. They were commands. Every belief was a seed, and every seed eventually grew roots in reality. One afternoon, he came across another passage from Napoleon Hill. Every man is what he is because of the dominating thoughts which he permits to occupy his mind. He underlined it twice. He realized most people don't choose their dominating thoughts. They inherit them. From family, from culture, from failure. They live lives built on borrowed fears. He was done with that. That night, he began a new exercise. He wrote down every belief that still limited him, every invisible rule he obeyed without question. Then, next to each, he wrote its opposite truth. "I'm not ready" became "Preparation is born from action." "I don't deserve success" became "My effort earns my worth." "It's too late" became "Time bends for the determined." He repeated each one slowly, feeling the words sink into his body like gentle fire. At first, his mind resisted. It argued, whispered, mocked. But he knew the voice. It was the old program defending itself. He smiled and kept going. Because belief doesn't change through argument. It changes through repetition. Days turned into weeks. He no longer needed reminders taped to the mirror. The phrases lived inside him now. He caught himself thinking differently, automatically choosing possibility over fear. When faced with problems, his first reaction was no longer panic. It was curiosity. "What can this teach me?" he would ask. He realized every challenge was a teacher disguised as chaos. The same struggles that once broke him now trained him. Every moment became an opportunity to strengthen the mind muscle of faith. He started reading more, not for knowledge, but for alignment. He filled his evenings with the wisdom of thinkers and visionaries. He noticed they all said the same thing in different words, that the universe bends to the mind disciplined by purpose. He began sleeping better, waking lighter, thinking clearer. Even his face changed, not dramatically but subtly. He carried himself differently. Eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, voice calm, because peace, real peace, is visible. One morning, while riding the train, he saw his reflection in the window, not the mirror, but the faint reflection against the city rushing past. For a moment, he didn't recognize himself, not because he looked different, but because he felt different. The man staring back wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He was no longer reacting to life. He was creating it. He realized then that discipline wasn't punishment. It was love, the kind of love that says, "I believe in you enough to train you." And he began to understand what Napoleon Hill truly meant by the word faith. Faith wasn't blind belief in miracles. Faith was loyalty to possibility. It was the act of choosing trust over fear, again and again, until the choice became identity. Weeks later, he began teaching this principle in small ways. At lunch with a coworker, he said, "You can tell what someone believes by what they expect." When a friend complained about bad luck, he replied gently, Maybe luck is just belief meeting opportunity. He wasn't preaching. He was sharing what had saved him. He found joy in helping others see their own invisible chains. He realized that awareness is contagious. When one person breaks free from fear, they light a path for others to follow. And yet, even as peace grew inside him, tests continued. The mind, like a muscle, must be challenged to grow. One morning, an unexpected setback hit. A deal at work collapsed, money ran tight, and uncertainty returned. The old voice tried to whisper again. See? It was all temporary. But now, he recognized it instantly. He took a deep breath and said aloud, "No, this is my test. And I'm ready." Instead of collapsing into worry, he sat down and began writing again. This time, not affirmations, but gratitude. He wrote, "Thank you for the challenge. It's proof that I'm still growing." Within hours, his state shifted. Fear turned to focus. Frustration turned to faith. He took small, consistent actions, and things began to align again. It wasn't luck. It was the rhythm of cause and effect, guided by intention. He learned that the world mirrors the vibration you hold most often. And his new vibration was belief. He began guarding his mental state like a sacred flame. No gossip, no negative self-talk, no distractions disguised as entertainment. He treated his attention as currency, too precious to waste. Each morning began with silence. Not scrolling, not noise, not rush. Just breath, gratitude, and vision. He closed his eyes and saw his goals clearly, not as fantasies, but as blueprints. He felt them, tasted them, lived them in his imagination. Because imagination, he realized, wasn't pretending, it was previewing. And soon, reality began to follow. Small opportunities appeared. Doors that once seemed locked opened effortlessly. Conversations aligned, timing flowed. It wasn't magic. It was resonance. The outer world had no choice but to reflect the inner one. And every time he saw evidence of that truth, he smiled quietly and whispered, "Thank you." Because gratitude was the proof that faith had taken root. Months passed. His journal filled with pages of thoughts that once would have seemed impossible. Ideas, goals, visions, not grand illusions, but grounded clarity. He had stopped chasing success. He had become success, not as an outcome, but as a state of being. One evening, as the sun set beyond the window, he looked at his reflection again. He remembered that night of the storm, the confrontation with his shadow, the breaking of illusion. It felt like a lifetime ago. The mirror now reflected peace, not fear. Faith, not doubt. Purpose, not confusion. He smiled gently and whispered, "You did it." But then another realization struck him. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. He understood that reprogramming the mind isn't a destination. It's a daily practice, a lifetime of choosing awareness over autopilot. Because the illusion tries to return, not as fear this time, but as comfort. Comfort whispers, "You've done enough. You can rest now." But growth doesn't rest. It evolves. He laughed softly and said to the mirror, "Then let's evolve." He closed his notebook, turned off the light, and stood for a moment in the quiet. The night outside was calm, the sky deep blue and infinite. He looked up and thought of one final truth Napoleon Hill had written. You have absolute control over only one thing, your thoughts. This is the most significant fact known to man. He smiled, because now he didn't just understand it. He lived it. He whispered, "I am the master of my thoughts." And in that sentence lived everything he had ever sought: freedom, purpose, peace. That night, he fell asleep, not as a man waiting for miracles, but as one who had become one. Because the greatest miracle was never outside him. It was the quiet, unshakable knowledge that the mind, once reprogrammed with faith, becomes unstoppable. Months passed. The seasons shifted quietly, marking time not by chaos, but by calm. He had become someone new, not in appearance, but in energy. There was a steadiness in him now, an invisible confidence that didn't need to announce itself. People noticed, not because he spoke louder or achieved something dramatic, but because he carried peace like a light no one could ignore. The once restless man, the one who doubted every step, who replayed every mistake, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood what few ever realize: that all suffering begins and ends in the mind. He had learned to pause before reacting, to breathe before believing, and to choose before surrendering to old patterns. He no longer sought motivation. He cultivated direction. One quiet morning, as sunlight spilled across his desk, he opened the notebook that had become his daily companion. The pages were filled, hundreds of lines of affirmations, reflections, moments of struggle, and sudden awakenings. He smiled as he read the early entries. "I'm trying to believe. I hope this works. Maybe I can change." He almost didn't recognize the handwriting. It was filled with hesitation, with trembling faith. But now, as he flipped through the later pages, the tone had transformed. "I am the master of my thoughts. I attract what I become. My faith is stronger than my fear." He closed the notebook gently and whispered, "You kept your promise." Then he stood and walked to the mirror. The same mirror that had witnessed his collapse, his confrontation, and his rebirth. It no longer felt like an enemy. It was an ally, a witness. He gazed into his reflection, not to find flaws or doubts, but to remember how far he'd come. The man looking back at him now wasn't a collection of beliefs. He was the architect of them. He thought back to the countless mornings he had stood here, repeating words he barely believed in. The irony wasn't lost on him. He hadn't changed because he believed because he changed. Each small repetition, each quiet act of faith, had carved new grooves in his mind, like rivers shaping stone. What once felt impossible had become natural. Faith was no longer a fight, it was home. He realized then that belief isn't built in a day. It's sculpted, slowly, painfully, beautifully, through persistence. And the sculpture it creates isn't success. It's self. He touched the mirror and smiled softly. The man in the reflection smiled back, not out of pride, but gratitude. He whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." Outside, the morning was still young. He stepped out of the apartment and walked through the city streets. The air was cool and alive, filled with the quiet hum of beginnings. People hurried past, faces lost in thought, eyes glued to their devices, prisoners of invisible programs, unaware of their own cages. He didn't judge them. He understood them. He had been one of them, rushing, fearing, reacting, living half awake. He wanted to tell them all, "You can be free. The door has been open all along." But he knew most wouldn't listen, not yet. Truth only reaches those ready to see it. And readiness often comes through pain. He stopped at a small park bench beneath a tree and sat down, feeling the sun warm his face. For a moment, he just breathed. No goals, no tasks, no striving, just existence. He looked around and noticed something he'd never paid attention to before, the details of reality itself. The way light shimmered on the leaves. The way sound moved like a gentle tide. The way life continued, effortlessly, without asking permission. He thought, "The universe has always been abundant. I was the one who wasn't open to it." He remembered another line from Napoleon Hill, one that now felt like a heartbeat within him. "Your big opportunity may be right where you are now." He smiled again, because he finally understood what it meant. The opportunity wasn't out there. It was in here, in thought, in focus, in awareness. Every limitation he had once seen was simply an unopened door in his own perception. He had learned to open those doors, one belief at a time. As he sat there, a soft breeze brushed against his face, carrying the scent of earth and distant rain. And in that still moment, he realized something profound. He didn't need to keep erasing beliefs anymore. He had learned to replace them. He whispered to himself, "Erase the illusion. Build the truth." And in that phrase lived the entire journey. He stood and began walking again, slow and steady, each step grounded in faith. The city buzzed around him. Cars, voices, noise. But inside, there was stillness. He carried that stillness like armor. Because peace, once found, becomes unshakable. He understood now why so few people ever master their minds. Because it's easier to blame the world than to face the mirror. It's easier to stay in illusion than to rebuild identity from nothing. But once you do, once you tear down the false walls and stand bare before your own thoughts, there's nothing left to fear. Because illusion only survives in darkness. And awareness is light. That night, as the city slept, he sat by the window one last time. The moonlight cast long silver shadows across the room, and he smiled. The same room, the same man, but a different world. He picked up his notebook, opened it to a blank page, and wrote his final affirmation, not for change, but for truth. I am no longer becoming. I simply am. He looked at the sentence, feeling its weight. It wasn't arrogance, it was acceptance. He no longer needed to become more than he was. He only needed to remember what he had always been. A creator of thoughts, a vessel of faith, a fragment of infinite mind. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered, "Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve." But this time, it wasn't a quote. It was his lived reality. He felt a quiet emotion rise in his chest. Not joy, not pride, something gentler. It was peace that comes when the battle is over and the lesson is complete. He thought of the millions still trapped in illusions, afraid, unaware that fear itself is the illusion. He hoped that one day they'd hear this message. Not from a book, not from him, but from within themselves. Because truth never shouts. It waits, patient, eternal, silent, inside every mind. He closed the notebook, placed it on the table, and turned off the light. The room fell into darkness, but inside, he glowed. Not with light, but with understanding. He whispered one last time into the quiet. "Thank you, mind. You've finally come home." And as he drifted into sleep, he felt something he had never truly felt before. Not success, not control, not victory. Freedom. The kind of freedom that cannot be taken away because it was never outside to begin with. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments what belief you're ready to erase tonight.